All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to another Monday expert interview. And today is going to be one of those days where I don't know if we're going to be able to get through all the information. There's a ton of information we're going to talk about today. We have a special guest on, and we're going to introduce that guest in just one moment. But first, we got to get through some housekeeping. So listen, we are live on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. And why are we on Twitch? Because the young folks are on Twitch and we need everybody to join us. We need the younger generation into the construction space if we're going to really innovate and take this to the next level. At Dave Cooper Live, we are bringing you the people and the processes that are building it better. Our guests include experts in building systems, the building science, building codes, building tech, fintech, and everything in between to build it better. We are seeking out the best and the brightest in construction and discovering all the ways that innovative buildings come to life. Today is no different. All right, before we introduce the guest, we have another special guest who's going to do that introduction. So let's bring in Betsy Scott. Hey, what's happening, Betsy? How are you today? Oh, I can't hear you, Betsy. You're muted.
There we go. Good. How are you doing?
Man, I'm doing great. How is Betsy Scott and the Housing Innovation Alliance doing today?
Oh, we're doing really well. I'm very excited for today's guest on your show. She's got a focus really on driving affordability and attainability in the housing industry, and has really done some inspiring things over the last few years. With 3D printing in South America really to start, and really has a bigger vision of how from a venture capital fund she can help impact what we're doing as an industry. And as you know, attainability is kind of near and dear to our heart on the Alliance side. We've been looking at production housing, and I think she's going to end up meeting us in the middle here with solutions that would work in all aspects of housing. So I'm very excited to hear more from today's guest, Julietta from Home Team Ventures.
I love it. Yep. So we're going to bring Julietta in just a moment. So everybody understands Housing Innovation Alliance. You guys are doing amazing things. You guys are like, to me, this huge just think tank of information and innovation and all things exciting. And this is how we had the opportunity to connect. And I had the opportunity to also meet Julietta and have her on the show. So these are the types of people you'll get to meet at the Housing Innovation Alliance. And you guys have always been big supporters of what we're doing here. So I want to make sure I give you the credit.
I appreciate that. And we're looking forward to actually doing some work with Julietta. She's going to be part of our working group for the future of housing, where we gather a collection of 8 or 10 people who have interest in some of the different topics that we're looking at, and bringing their expertise to the group in general. So we're excited to get her engaged. And she and Alexandria and Home Team Ventures are the first female minority-led venture capital group in the industry. So that's super impressive and very exciting for me as a woman in the housing industry to welcome thought leaders like Julietta and her team.
Yeah, it sounds like we need to add her to the her stories in housing, because we always say we're going to go further, faster, the more women we have in this industry. I believe it. I work with my wife, and she outthinks me, outsmarts me, outmaneuvers me. I'm just really good at running my mouth. So I believe that wholeheartedly. All right. So go ahead, make the introduction. Let's bring Julietta in.
So here is Julietta Moraday from Home Team Ventures. She started by working in South America and is actually looking at a holistic view of driving innovation through startups in the housing industry.
Julietta, welcome to the show.
Thank you. So great to be here. I was snapping my fingers in the background when we were talking about the first minority female-led fund. Very, very excited to be in this space and talking to both of you today.
Yeah. So I've had some offline conversation with Julietta, and one, this is going to be such a fun conversation because there's so much energy. I think you're going to outdo me on the energy space. 2, this is going to be one of those shows you have so much to share. I probably won't have much to say because you're just going to run with it, and I love that. And 3, you guys are doing amazing things. And I think with your collaboration with the Housing Innovation Alliance, we're really looking forward to kicking this show off. So why don't you take a few moments? We ask everybody to do this. We want to know everything about you from the moment you were born to this very moment in time. Do not leave out anything from the hospital, or we're going to call your mom. and ask her, but you only have about 3 to 5 minutes to do it. So go ahead and do that. And Betsy, we'll come back to you at the end of the show. How's that sound?
Sounds like a plan.
Good. Julietta, I'm putting you full screen so we can hear your elevator story.
So if I'm starting off from birth, I'm from Buenos Aires, Argentina, where my whole family lives. So I very much grew up in a city in a developing country where we have slums right beside the most high-rise buildings with upper class, and really that contrast between both. So I've always been passionate about housing, and more specifically, I was very passionate about design in the built environment. So my background's in architecture and in structural engineering. I got my master's at UC Berkeley in structural engineering, where I was first exposed to seismic design and really the innovation behind earthquake engineering. I worked for several years at Airworks as a structural engineer, which is one of the largest companies in the built environment, where we have every single discipline from civil engineers, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. So I got to see the entire scope of what it looks like to design anywhere from a bridge to a high rise. And one of the things that I noticed the most in those years of experience was that there's a huge lack of innovation in our industry. So architecture, engineering, construction is actually one of the least innovative industries in every single sector on the globe, even though it's actually one of the biggest industries in terms of global GDP. So I was becoming very frustrated with this fact and really seeking innovation. So I heard about New Story Charity through a friend of mine, and it was this tiny nonprofit that started in 2015 focusing on homelessness. And they were trying to 3D print the very first house in the world in history. It was a tiny team at New Story and a tiny team at Icon. And I was just, I was impacted by what they were doing. And so I decided to join their team first as a volunteer for a few years. And then I loved it so much, I joined full time to become the head of R&D. So my primary job was to form partnerships with innovators and thought leaders in the space. So that could look anywhere from academia to industry to small startups like Icon that are really looking at innovations in the construction space. Innovations could be anywhere from 3D printing to some kind of software design to look at loan packaging. It really ranges in the housing sector. And what we're looking at is, instead of creating in-house innovation, how about we look out to the industry and see who's really innovating in this space and how can we actually help them to adapt the technology to bring it to rural Mexico, let's say, places in South America to use for the homelessness crisis. And so my primary role was, as head of R&D, was to form those partnerships to bring innovators and technologists in the space of housing for impact. So this idea of using innovation for impact first. And that's what we did with Icon, and that's what we've been doing with other R&D partners. Afterwards, we started Home Team Ventures, which I'm sure I'll be sharing much more about with Dave in the next hour.
I love it. Listen, you just keep going. I just wanted to come back in because, how you're focusing on, housing affordability, homelessness. I mean, there are some major statistics that we're going to share today that I'm sure a lot of people out there really don't understand where this is headed currently, and how important the work that your team is doing to be out there finding innovative solutions, working with innovative companies to solve the world's, in my opinion, largest problem. And that's housing and affordable housing and places for people, quite honestly, just to lay their heads down safely at night.
Exactly. And what we fundamentally believe when we started New Story and Home Team is that housing is a human right. If you don't have housing, you don't have water, you don't have food, you don't have access to these things. So we think that really we look at the pyramid of housing, which is shelter, water, and food, but housing is first. And so if we're able to provide that access to everyone that needs it, we truly have a more prosperous society. And so it's something that we always fundamentally want to look at as our North Star, which is that our goal in starting this venture capital firm, investing in these startups, is truly to drive the industry to have more access to housing. And what does that look like? It looks like lowering cost of housing, which is our number one goal. So yeah, I'd be happy to share much more info about this.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, I mean, it's like any survival show you watch out there. What's the first thing you do? Find shelter for the night.
Exactly.
Right. Then focus on the food and the water. Somebody's going to call me on that maybe, but I believe, right. But that's the first thing that we focus on. And let's get into this. So if you want to start, we're going to go through a presentation, and this is an interactive conversation. This is an opportunity for you out in the audience to ask Julietta anything you want to ask her. Talk to her, put it out there. If you got something to say, maybe you got a cool, innovative product or company, we want to hear from you. What the heck? So listen, Julietta, let's hop into it. I'm going to put you up on the screen here.
Perfect. Let me know when you can see it, Dave.
All right, you're up. Go for it.
So just to start off, when people think of New Story, if you haven't heard of New Story yet, the first thing you might see online is that we 3D printed the very first house in history with Icon. So Icon is one of those R&D partners, an amazing group of innovators in the 3D space and one of the biggest leaders in that space right now. So in 2017, we met the Icon team. Within a year, we permitted the very first 3D printed home in history using US building codes. If you know anything about the construction industry, you know that in the US, it's the most strict building codes globally. So the fact that we were able to print this house for a South by Southwest in Austin, Texas was enormous for us. But we didn't want to stop there. We wanted to showcase to the world that we were going to be using this technology the very first time in history for impact. Because usually if we're thinking about technology, it's never adopted first for the bottom billion. It's usually used for the top of the pyramid. And we truly want to bring an innovation for impact, in our case, for the housing crisis. And so within a year, we formed partnerships with News Story and the federal government of Mexico to bring this technology to rural Mexico to house the homeless. So we built an entire community within just 2 years in Mexico. And these are examples of the very first 2 homes we ever built. And now there's an entire street in Nacajuca, Mexico of 3D printed homes. This is so exciting because it truly showcases this idea of innovation first for impact, what it looks like to bring an innovation for the homeless in general. With this 3D printer, we're able to print 2 homes every 24 hours. So when we're thinking about the lack of supply of housing right now, if we're able to print 2 homes every 24 hours, we're really starting to look at the speed issue of housing. But just for some context on News Story first, News Story is a housing nonprofit that started through Y Combinator. So if you don't know Y Combinator, it's one of the biggest incubators, accelerators in the world. Very, very big companies have started through there. But News Story was one of the first nonprofits. And so being a nonprofit in this space was very unique because we're so impact driven versus revenue driven. And News Story is a housing nonprofit that's using innovation in construction to tackle the housing crisis. So when we look at the housing crisis, we have worked with federal governments in Central and South America over the past 5 years since News Story started to build housing with them. If you think about the tech sector, we always talk about customer discovery at the beginning, which is you need to understand your end user. And in our case, we wanted to understand governments and what are their biggest pain points in housing affordability? Why can't they build more housing every single year? So by building with them, we're able to understand their biggest barriers. And then after, what are the highest leverage solutions in technology that we could bring in to address those issues? And so over the past 5 years, we've built about 25 communities in Haiti, El Salvador, Mexico, and Bolivia. And that's about 3,000 homes that we've been able to build. And what's so fascinating about News Story's theory of change is that every single time we build a new community, it's almost like a sandbox of innovation, where we partner with an R&D partner, just like Icon with 3D printing, and we adapt the technology to bring it into a community and pilot it, showcase to the world that it works, what its impact is on cost and speed and quality, and then share with other governments around the world so that they'd start adopting it too. And together we could be bringing in more technology into the construction space.
I love it. Julietta, I'm going to go full screen with you here just 1 second. Okay. How to unpack this? One, going back to Icon, I had the opportunity to meet Dimitri with the Housing Innovation Alliance. We were in Texas a few months ago at that very home that you were showcasing there. And that community, and I want to touch on this and then get into what you were talking about with these other communities, was built really around community first, right? For homeless people.
Yep.
And they did the 3D printed home there, which was absolutely amazing. I mean, it's concrete, right? It's solid as it gets. So you're part of this. Icon also has been outsourced or hired by NASA to study moon dust, right? To build on the moon with a 3D printer. So, we are going to space. How does a company like yours or others find these innovative companies, not just here in the United States, but globally, to do what you're doing, right? Because that's part of the mission, finding the innovative technology and using it to build affordable housing. You don't hear a lot of people doing this, at least not successfully, and you guys are. So what's the secret sauce? How do you do it?
Well, the secret sauce is, number one, there's a lot of innovators out there. It's really about what you were saying, finding them. And then 2 is convincing them to be adapting their technology for housing. Because within construction tech, there's a lot out there. It's really getting founders to get excited about our space. So in terms of finding them, your first question, we have many different funnels of how we've been able to find them through New Story, through the R&D program, and now through Home Team Ventures, a venture fund. And the funnels could look pretty similar to other VC firms, but also different in the sense that at New Story, we launched a research fellowship. So our very first cohort of research fellows was 80 experts in housing across the spectrum. So in both academia, which is PhD students, all the way to industry leaders, we had people with 15, 20 years of experience in either housing, fintech, prop tech. And this cohort of research fellows, we've put them in different categories, different groups, where together they're researching things in housing, but also scouting ventures. And so really we're forming an army, a community of people that are incredibly passionate about housing. And they're trying to find a way, a leverage of how can I use this passion for good? And so we work very closely with our research fellows, which are an amazing group of people. And every single cohort gets bigger and better to be scouting these ventures and finding them. But there's a lot of other mechanisms. I mean, in the US alone, there's a ton of accelerator programs and incubators that are coming to light, housing alliances, the Ivory Prize in Utah. Things that in the past 3 to 5 years are truly coming to light because people are realizing the massive crisis in housing that's happening and the need for innovation in the construction sector and really the connection between those two. So we tap into a lot of these accelerator programs. An example is at MIT, they have a program called MIT Design X. And we work with them, we mentor these, either these founders or these ideas really. And some of the ones that we see as having a very big impact on lowering the cost of housing or increasing the speed at which we're building, we try to bring them into our space, either at New Story or at Home Team. So finding them is actually just trying to tap into these different funnels because there's a ton of innovation out there.
Yeah, there really is. We see it all the time on the show. I mean, it's amazing, and it's global innovation. I was even saying the other day, Australia is a hotspot. Who would have thought? That's how it's working. All right, so why don't we hop back into what you're doing, and then I'm writing down a ton of stuff here, so you're gonna have a busy end of presentation.
Don't get carpal tunnel on me.
All right, you ready?
Yes,
you're back.
So actually, you were just mentioning with Icon, how did we partner with them? How did we find them? How did they start building for NASA on the moon? Right. This is an incredible story. If we think that this all happened in 3 years, which in the construction sector, again, very little innovation and things move very slowly because of the permitting process. So with Icon, we met the founders in 2017, incredible founders, incredible team. We just really believed in their vision that if we used a 3D printer for housing, we could be building much quicker at a higher quality. We're using regular concrete in the printer. The difference is that now, because we're using robotics, we're making sure that we're building the house properly. When we're working near Mexico City, seismic design is everything. And for safety, we want to make sure we're building those connections properly. We're using the proper admixture. We're using the proper concrete for resiliency. So when we saw this, we immediately saw impact-driven design. So we meet Icon, and this is very rare, but as a nonprofit, we actually invested in them at the earliest stage. So that's what really distinguishes Icon compared to our other R&D partnerships. We had about 50 different R&D partnerships in the program at New Story, but Icon was the only one that we invested into at the earliest stage. So we're their first check at the door. We wanted to invest in their R&D program. Since then, if we look at the past 3 years, we were able to permit the very first home in Austin, Texas, like I mentioned. We then brought the printer to Mexico and printed an entire community of housing for the very first time in history. Apple TV did a documentary on Icon, on New Story, and on Echele, the local partner. You could check it out at Apple TV on a series called Home, and we're in the season finale called Mexico, episode 9, an amazing documentary. And we had over 1 billion impressions online, and that's really incredible for thinking about the impact space and people geeking out about construction for impact. Since then, Icon's been able to grow financially and grow in terms of scalability tremendously over the past 3 years. And we fundamentally believe it's because we invested in them at the earliest stage. We were able to work with them very closely. As home builders ourselves, we understood how do you adapt your technology to bring your printer to rural Mexico and print a house? What kind of materials you need to use? What kind of local labor are you using? What are things you're not thinking about because you need to be a home builder to understand these barriers first? The automotive industry, the robotics industry, aerospace is very different than housing. You need to have housing experts in this space to really be adopting these technologies. And the most important aspect is truly, we gave them a proof of concept location. So because Icon was able to do an entire community, they're now able to prove to the world in very little time because they're working in rural Mexico, so there's lower barriers of entry to actually pilot the whole community. They're able to prove that it works. We're using US building codes, how quickly we're able to iterate and improve the design and construction process. So then other partners around the world are saying, hey, why am I not doing this? That's why now they have, in very little time, an ability to be printing back in the US. And Dave, you went and saw it in person, and that's just in 1 year after they printed in Mexico, right? They're printing in the US, one of the hardest places to bring in innovation for the first time. They're printing housing for affordability, so they're very mission-driven with us. But they also have partnerships with HUD, Fannie Mae, NASA, big architects. And they're valued at over 150 million, which again, if we're looking at the hardware construction industry, we're looking at innovation in hardware, it's very hard to scale that quickly. So this case study truly showcases that if you're able to bring in a technology into a developing country, have a proof of concept, use it for impact, you're getting media impressions, you're getting impact-driven investors, and you're also getting customers much bigger than you ever anticipated. So this case study to us at News Story, when we were heading the R&D program, showcased to us, we are really following a double bottom line approach that is very rare in venture capital, because on one end, we're incredibly impact driven. We're using innovation solely for impact for housing. But on another end, we're able to scale these businesses, these small startups, incredibly quickly in a space that's usually very bureaucratic and slow. And so what if we continue doing this? What's a mechanism that we could continue investing in startups like Icon? It's by creating a VC fund. It's by creating a venture capital fund that we could actually have a mechanism to invest in more startups that we believe in and work alongside these founders to bring their technologies for impact to housing.
Yeah, for sure. Going back on 3D, Icon 3D printing. I mean, here's the technology. I mean, they have concrete all around the world, right? Obviously, on the moon potentially as well. So this is something where it's just moving a piece of machinery and setting it up, and then using the local resources to build this. So it's creating jobs, I would imagine, wherever this goes as well. Is that accurate?
It's creating jobs, and it's also creating different kinds of jobs. So one of the main things that we always get asked is, are you eliminating jobs by now bringing in robotics? And the answer is no. We're just changing the kinds of jobs that we have. If we look at Henry Ford Model T, that's something that we always kind of relate to in the housing space with the automotive space. It's not that we're eliminating jobs, we're just changing them and actually increasing the quality of workforce. Now, I mean, Betsy and I talked a lot about this because we're bringing in robotics. Now we're seeing a lot more females in the labor space because now females are able to work on these machineries, right? So that's something that's huge. We're providing jobs to a different set of people, or maybe even potentially providing more jobs than there ever were before. It's just about being creative and thinking about the space a little bit differently. But definitely we are creating jobs, and perhaps on the moon, like you were just saying.
I know. I love that. How cool is that? Who gets reached out to by NASA and says, hey, check out this moon dust. Can we use it with your printer? That's pretty cool stuff. All right. So we're talking about these innovations, these companies, your process to invest in them, take them to market. Why don't you walk somebody through, say, who would be like, listen, I have this great idea. We have our concepts in place. Should I reach out to you? Is this how this works? Walk us through this, or is that part of your presentation? I'll put it back up.
Let me see right now. So in terms of walking through, does it make sense for a founder to pitch to us? Number one answer is Home Team is a venture fund that will be investing in early stage startups over the next few years in construction tech. So I'll walk through really the genesis of Home Team and what our investment thesis is. And if you are a founder with an amazing idea and you're passionate about housing and using your technology, perhaps our stars could align here. So I'm just going to walk through really the genesis of News Story and intro to who we are. And if you feel like it aligns, definitely reach out to us.
But let's take a minute. I see some questions popped up. You got a moment for questions, Julietta?
Of course, always.
I love it. All right. Let me go to the top here. We'll do some comments first just to say hello. Buzz Holitzer, happy Monday. Hey, Buzz, thank you for joining us today. Love it. We have Chris Roush. Hey, what's happening, Chris? Thank you for joining us today. Look forward to today. We have Wayne T. Lawrence. Can we build in U.S.? Not sure what he's referring to there. Do you know what he's referring to?
I'm pretty sure about 3D printing. That's what we get asked a lot. And yes, Icon is already building in the U.S. They started building right after they built in Mexico. So you're going to be seeing a lot more 3D printed homes in the U.S.
Saw it from my own eyes in Texas. Community first development. Love it. All right. We got Henry Mickelberg. Henry's joining us. A couple of questions. How do you achieve code for thermal insulation? Are you exclusively aligned with Icon machines, or do you consider other printing machinery options?
So I'll tackle your first question about thermal insulation. So if you actually look at the video on YouTube, if you Google right now, news story and icon 3D printing, you could see a video of how they do the cross section of the walls. So what it looks like is that you have the inner wall and the outer wall and a lattice structure between. So you start having these kinds of voids that look like triangular voids in the cross section of the home. And that's where you have space for thermal bridging, for utilities that you could wire through. So in terms of different building codes, depending on where you're building in the world, you'd have different kinds of thermal insulation and using those codes to actually infill those voids. And then the second question, I believe you had a second question, right, Dave?
Yep.
Perfect. If we're working exclusively with Icon. So the answer is no. Icon is an R&D partner that News Story worked with to print in Mexico. So we exclusively worked with Icon to be building in that community. But we work with many different kinds of R&D partners. In that same community, actually, in Nacajuca, Mexico, the 3D printed homes are just 20 homes out of 500. So what I was mentioning before is that every news story community is like a lab case study. It's a sandbox of innovation. We partner with many different innovators. So one of them is Icon. Another one is Airworks, where we're actually doing a cool roofing project and putting paint on the tops of roofs to passively cool down the temperature of homes. We're looking at many different kinds of innovations. On the home team side, we're going to be investing in about 25 portfolio companies. So we're not just looking exclusively at one kind of 3D printing. Hardware, in terms of construction tech, is one of the different sectors that we're investing in, but we're also investing in software products, machine learning, AI, material science. So many different things that look at lowering housing costs.
Love it. Love it. Thanks, Henry. I appreciate that. And you're right. They print kind of an outside wall, an inside wall, and then zigzag and fill it with insulation, I think, on that icon. So it's cool stuff. All right. Frederick Wanius, I think, please don't get me if I got your name messed up there. We just 3D printed the first building in Florida. So I don't know if you know Frederick. I do not. Frederick, I'd love to know how you 3D printed it. What did you use? Did you use concrete or did you use other materials? Because there's other materials now being used for 3D printing. Put it in the comments if you don't mind. Oh, it looks like he added a link, so might be able to check that out here after we get
I'd
through.
love to see that, Frederick.
Yeah, so maybe at the end, if we have some time, we'll pull it up, see if I can play it. Sound good?
Perfect.
That'll be fun. All right, so there we have it. Let's hop back into your presentation, Julietta.
Wonderful. So again, for anyone just joining right now, we're talking about Home Team Ventures and truly the genesis of what started the venture fund and what our investment thesis is. So what that means is for any founders out there in construction tech, really what we are looking for in terms of investments. So to start off, Dave was talking about before that there's these very big numbers that are our North Star, and most people just don't know these numbers and truly the impact-driven alignment of our fund. So today, there's 1.6 billion people in the world who don't have access to adequate housing. What that means is that there's 1.6 billion people who don't have safe shelter to sleep in at night. And what the UN is projecting is that in less than 10 years, so by 2030, this number is doubling to 3 billion people globally.
That's huge.
So it's huge. And if we're thinking about construction, we all know that it's literally impossible with current construction methods to be building 3 billion homes by 2030. Even if we had infinite money and all governments were throwing money at construction firms, it's impossible to build this many housing units.
Yeah, for sure.
This is also coupled, Dave, by what you were saying before, that the construction industry is incredibly undigitized. So within every single industry vertical, McKinsey released this awesome report. I urge everyone to read it, where they're comparing every single industry vertical. And the construction industry is at the very, very bottom for least digitized. So it lacks innovation, right above farming, which, is pretty sad when we're considering the construction industry represents 13% of the global GDP. It only invests about 0.5% of its value into R&D. Most industry verticals invest about 6%, and we're only investing 0.5%. So there's truly a very big need for more innovation in the housing sector because of that 1.6 billion number. And on the other end, there's a very big lack of innovation. So for all the founders out there, you're going to be really filling this void for us to be bringing in more innovation in the space.
So are you saying that the only place for us to go is up?
The only place for us to go is up. So I feel like we've hit rock bottom in terms of, I guess rock bottom is farming, but I'm not going to talk about that industry. But we're pretty much at the bottom and we need to be going up. So it's a very exciting time because like we said before, there's a ton of innovators out there there's a lot more VC capital right now in this space. Since 2015, there's a lot more VCs in our space that are investing in construction tech. Now it's just about finding the right founders and having really awesome proof of concept projects and getting more people excited about the construction industry. So our big goal with Home Team, and this is really going at your question of, if you're a founder, should you be pitching to us? Well, number one, if you're aligned with our vision that we want to be using construction tech for impact for the housing sector, then yes, reach out to us. The second thing is that our number one goal is we're looking for construction tech that's lowering the cost of housing. So a lot of times people think that your innovation needs to be just for housing, and that's not true. We're looking at construction tech as a whole. So anything along the value chain. For example, if you're looking at making surveying more efficient, surveying impacts every single kind of construction project, whether it's a building, whether it's a bridge. But we know that if we brought that innovation to the housing sector, it's lowering the cost of the entire housing unit because surveying is a part of that project. So our number one goal with Home Team Ventures over the lifespan of our fund is with our 25 portfolio companies, when we pick and choose certain companies in a specific project, we want to lower housing costs by half, which is a very ambitious goal, but we truly believe that we could do it with the right innovations.
And how can I ask, how do you calculate that when you're looking at new innovation, right? Because it has to be done on my opinion is you would have to have something that can build on such a large scale to be able to do that, to get the volume. Is that accurate?
Very, very accurate. And one of the biggest answers there in terms of calculating is, how do you measure the impact? So how are you measuring the impact of lowering cost, increasing speed? And you can't just measure it on one proof of concept project, right? You can't measure on the first time you ever use it. You have to measure it over a lot of projects over time. The way that we're going to be thinking about it over the lifespan of our fund is the same way we did with Icon. With Icon, we brought it to Mexico, and our theory at News Story is that we create, prove, and share. So we create by partnering with an R&D partner, partnering with a startup, create an innovation, adapt it for the use case of housing. We prove it by doing a proof of concept community, where we are very much calculating every aspect of cost and speed, and we're comparing it to traditional methods of construction, and then we share. So that share aspect, what that means is then we start bringing in other governments, other NGOs, other nonprofits, other developers in the housing space to look at the innovation and say, if I adopt this, I could be reducing 20% of my cost in this location of the value chain. So what we're hoping to do with the share aspect is engage more people, because as one organization, as one VC company, or as one nonprofit in the housing sector, we are never going to achieve the scalability to be measuring the full impact. But what we could do is share amongst other developers, other builders, and help them also be measuring the impact. And collectively together, we could start sharing what that impact looks like over time. In terms of more specifically how, though, so when I talk about the value chain, if you're looking at my slide right now, this is how we're thinking about a value chain for construction in terms of housing. And it really looks like this for any construction project, which is we're starting to divide it through the pipeline of from inception that you want to, you bought your land and you want to start building there, all the way through post-building. If we start dividing that up into different sections, where can we start driving an innovation? We want to be hyper-focused on bringing in portfolio companies that are reducing cost in their particular bucket, not along the entire value chain, because they need to be hyper-focused in one sector. So this is an example of how we're looking at it. So we divide it up into 5 different sections. You could even get more granular if you want to. And then for every portfolio company, which you're seeing in that first row, so these are the first 4 investments that Home Team has done, we are going to be tracking and measuring what's their impact on lowering costs, specifically for projects that we're maybe partnering or fostering in the housing space. Then what we want to do is say, okay, let's say we work with a government in 6 years that's doing a housing community in Panama, let's say. And we know that their biggest barriers in Panama is surveying land. It takes way too much time and resources. And at the very end of the construction life cycle is actually selling it. What we're going to do is we're going to suggest you should be adopting technology A and technology B for your biggest barriers. And we're going to be measuring the impact of what that does in terms of lowering cost overall. And that's going to take some time, right? That's going to take more than just us measuring this impact. It's going to take an entire community of people that are open to bringing in innovation, piloting it, and then measuring that impact and sharing it all together in an open source fashion.
Love it.
Perfect. So I'm going to go back to the impact side of it. So we just shared the 1.6 billion people in the world without housing. That number is increasing to 3 billion by 2030 in less than 1 year. So why are we focused on housing costs? So again, I said our number one goal with Home Team is to lower housing costs by half. Well, we're always looking at that number of what's the biggest barrier that's causing 3 billion people by 2030 to not have access to housing. And we have worked with many governments, federal, state, municipal, over the past 5 years as home builders through News Story. And we understand that the biggest barrier, the number one barrier in housing is housing costs. It costs way too much. Developers, for example, can't even break even sometimes with affordable housing projects. So we need to be lowering the cost of housing. So if we start looking at South America, which is where News Story works, and we said, okay, let's say we lowered the cost of housing to $10,000 per unit. Right now in developing countries, it's about $45,000 US per unit to build a home. In the US, about $250,000 for an affordable housing unit. What if we lower that cost of housing to $10,000? What happens to these numbers? So in Central and South America, what that means is 35% more people that are unhoused would have access to housing. So that's 182 million people today that would have access to housing if that was the cost of a home.
Wow. How do you calculate getting to a number with these innovations and companies that you're looking to partner with, invest with, help grow? Like the scale, are you looking at the statistics of what it's going to take to actually start making an impact? Like how
actually we found some numbers actually very recently. We were with our research fellows, like I was mentioning before. We have an awesome cohort of 80 plus research fellows. They look at those numbers specifically. So we have groups that are looking at specifically for policy, another one for finance, another one for innovation, industrialized construction. We have very particular groups. But one was looking more at the data side. So we're constantly collecting data for impact. And we were looking at, okay, 1.6 billion people today that are homeless. How much money would it take in terms of resources? Before I was saying if we had infinite money, we still can't house everybody because of the speed of building. But how much money would it actually take? So we were just doing some ballpark numbers. And we first looked at how much does it cost to do housing today in developing countries and in first world countries. So in developing countries, like I mentioned, it's about $45,000 per unit. In first world countries, it's about $250,000 per unit. So we were also looking at how much do first world countries spend per year on housing. So in the US, on average, they spend about $46 billion per year on affordable housing. The thing is, at $250 a pop for affordable housing, how much would it take for us to be housing 1.6 billion people? And the answer is 72 trillion. So of course, we don't have the resources in terms of monetary resources to be funding these projects, but let alone money. If money wasn't a thing, it doesn't make sense with time. We cannot be building fast enough to be looking at all these urban dwellers at housing 3 billion people by 2030. So when we look at innovation, that's why we're so hyper-focused on cost, on breaking down that cost, but then also on speed. So the slide that I have up right now is our investment thesis. So what companies are we looking at for Home Team Ventures? We're looking at double bottom line startups. So startups that, one, you want to grow your business, you want to achieve high net returns for your startup and scale quickly, but also you care a lot about impact. You care about using your technology for good. And your construction tech, what does it do? It's reducing the cost of construction. It's increasing the quality of building, and it's decreasing time of cost. These are the three biggest barriers that we have felt over the past 5 years by working with dozens of governments across the world in terms of housing.
Wow, I love it. Listen, everybody, real quick, if you are just joining us, can you believe it's already 43 minutes almost, Julietta? We're going to get through all of this. So if you're just joining us, we are live on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. Julietta, why are we live on Twitch?
So you asked me about Twitch before, and the honest answer is I can't even follow up with TikTok. My brother had to tell me what TikTok was. So if you ask me about Twitch, I honestly, I think it's probably a really great platform, and I'm sure young folks are on it, and I hope you're loving it.
I am loving it because it's where the virtual world is living right now, and a lot of these young techs. So we are live on Twitch now as well. And also, guess who who's on Twitch with us? The chairman of the National Association of Home Builders joins us from Twitch here. And again, the immediate past chairman, I say, Greg Ugaldi. All right, everybody, let's hop back into it with Julietta Marati. In the middle of your presentation, I'm going to put you back up. You're ready to go.
Wonderful. So we're talking about Home Team Ventures and the kinds of companies, early stage startups in construction tech that we will be investing into. So again, these are companies that are very early stage, so pre-seed through Series A. You have some kind of awesome construction tech with a number one focus of lowering cost of construction. Why we care about it is because we want to be adopting it for the housing space. So these are some examples of companies that we are going to be investing into and that we've already invested into. So that first row are actually Home Team portfolio companies. So these are the first 4 companies we've invested into. Home Team Ventures, we launched in August of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic. So just a few months into our fund, we've already raised about $7 million of our $15 million fund. So we're actively fundraising right now for LPs to join our fund, but we're also seeking companies. So I'm just going to cover an example of a company that we've invested into, which is called Airworks, which is the first one you're seeing here, which is part of the conception phase. So I love this graph because it truly showcases what Airworks does, and it showcases how archaic the construction industry is. So surveying, I'm sure you've all seen surveyors on the street. They have these tripod-looking camera things, and they're measuring points on land. Anytime you want to do any kind of construction project, you need to be measuring your points to make a map, a topographic map, so you could lay out the perimeter of your building, of your bridge, whatever you are building. This graph is showcasing to you what surveying looked like back in the 1900s and what it looks like in 2020 or 2021. The only difference that you are seeing is that now we're adding color. That cannot be the case in our industry. We need to be improving and bringing in innovation in our industry. So Airworks saw this as a massive problem that surveying looks the same for the past 100 plus years, and they wanted to automate this process. So what they're doing is they're taking out drones that have LiDAR scanning. So what that means is that they're taking essentially these cameras on drones and they're mapping out aerial data. So if you go into Google Maps, for example, that is aerial data. And then they use a machine learning algorithm, a software package that converts that information, the aerial mapping visuals, directly into line work. So what that means is this line work that you're seeing here is different colors. You're seeing the yellow for vegetation. You're seeing the perimeter of buildings in a different color, utilities, roadways. Why that matters is for any kind of engineer to design a project, they first need to understand the topographic mapping of the region. And that's actually one of the biggest barriers that we feel anytime that we start a project with News Story. Whenever we're doing home building, we have to build a community. We need to first have a map of the land to understand how much space do we have? What are the different elevations in the ground? Is there vegetation we need to cut down? Do we have utilities? So as an example of News Story Communities, the housing nonprofit that was a genesis of Home Team Ventures, this is a real example of the kinds of surveys that we get in Haiti. So I've been down to Haiti and we've had to go down because these are the surveys that we're getting. They say not to scale. I have no information about utilities, no information about vegetation or the elevations in land or the lots of homes. Are there people that live there? No information, and this takes months to do. So we saw this as a major pain point, and in informal settlements, so in developing countries, informal settlements are very, very common. What that means is that people don't own their land. They just plop on a land and build homes themselves. It's very common. They don't have access to land titles. And what that means is anyone could strip away their home whenever they want to. The government could come in, anyone could come in and take away their home. So it's one of the biggest barriers to having access to adequate housing. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to invest in a company. The very first company Home Team invested into was addressing this issue. And so as soon as we invested into Airworks, we connected them to the government in Panama with the authority of the Panama Canal, with ANATI, which is their government entity that's doing informal settlement land titles. And we wanted to do a pilot project with them so that we could be mapping out these informal settlements. So starting this month, we are working with them to be mapping out 700 lots. So it's 700 families that are going to be getting land titles finally. And the Panama government wanted to do this as a pilot case study first to say, how much money are we going to be saving? How much time are we going to be saving? And if this works, should we do it for the entirety of the country? So the double bottom line approach I was previously talking about is that on one end, we're having major impact. We are using Airworks, a technology that's used right now in the US. We're going to be using it in Panama for informal settlements. But on another end, this is going to be their largest contract yet since starting Airworks, because they're going to be working with a national government. And the graph you're seeing here is some of those metrics that we were measuring. So we were talking a lot, Dave, about the kinds of metrics that we're measuring in terms of cost and speed and quality. So right now, the ANATI team in Panama, it takes them about 3 years to map out this many lots. Because they have a team of 8 people, they have to do it by hand. It takes a long time to go and map out every single lot. And with Airworks, we could do this in about 1 to 2 months, all while saving money by doing this. We're saving about 30% of costs. So this is an example where we would do a pilot case study. If it works out perfectly, Panama is going to use it for the rest of their informal settlements in the country. Then other countries are going to start saying, we want to do the same thing. And that's how we could start the domino effect of impact.
Yeah, I love it. And so this is all being done with technology and drones. So they're going to send a team of people down there, work with the government, and hopefully give the people on these properties deeds that will change their lives, right? And they won't be living in fear, is what I'm hearing. That's amazing.
They won't be living in fear. And this is the biggest barrier, the first hurdle that you go through to have access to housing. You need to have your land titles. You need to have a place that's yours. You have ownership. Once you could start building your home that you know is yours for generations to come, you start forming a community, more prosperous community. And we've seen that over and over again through news story communities, that once people feel like they have a safe shelter, a safe home, and a safe community, they start making businesses internally. They start having better education, more access to water and food. It's that what we were talking about at the beginning, Dave, of really housing is at the top of the pyramid and a human right.
Right, absolutely. And it sounds like, like this technology here, it's affordable for governments to invest in, especially governments that maybe are struggling, don't have the money, because that has to be a key factor in this as well, because they're looking at those budgets all the time, right?
Of course. And actually, someone asked me recently, how do you get adoption by governments as a customer when they're the most bureaucratic customers you could work with? Which is true. The answer is anytime you go to any customer and you say, I could save you money in your process and I can make your life much easier, they say yes. So I love this example because, within, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, we were able to convince the federal government to say yes to a new technology. So if that's the case, why are we not doing that in all development projects in the US, for example, right? It's through, again, creating proven sharing. It's the sharing aspect and getting traction in that space.
Sure. 2 to 3 weeks. All right. Here's a little story. It's taken me 3 weeks just to get an appointment at the DMV to get the title for my new motor coach that we're traveling the country. And so, that's amazing. You're absolutely right. And of course, but if it makes sense, they know it's a need and it's not a cost structure that's going to have them go broke or raise too many red flags. That's kind of a win-win.
Exactly. And the interesting about proof of concept projects is we're not just measuring the successes, we're also measuring the failures, right? Yeah. Anytime you adopt a new technology, there's going to be failures and you have to learn from them. So it's tracking those failures or tracking those hurdles that we have to cross and then sharing those as well. As a community, we have to be sharing that if we want to be driving the community up all together. We have to be measuring the impact, which means we have to be measuring how much cost are you saving, how much time are you saving, and measuring what do we need to improve as an entire community of architects, engineers, developers to really bring these technologies to light.
Yeah, I love it. Learn to fail, fail to learn, right? Exactly. All right, you got time for a couple more comments and questions?
Of course I do.
Before we move forward? All right, let's do this here. Got to scroll up. You got some interesting. All right, so Frederick got back to us. Cobod, BOD2, and Latticrete, I'm assuming that's what he's saying, M68 material is what they are using. Frederick. The 3D print. I'd love to learn what 3D printer and machines you're using, so put it in the comments too, please. All right, Joel Hutchins joining late. Good afternoon, all. Joel's an interesting cat. Do you know Joel Hutchins? He's into parametric design, Revaya. So he's doing some pretty cool stuff. Joel's changing the construction industry all on his own, he'll tell you. Nah, he's a good person. All right, he also said, what a great approach, create, prove, share. Henry Mickelberg, if you can demonstrate the tangible improvement metrics with robust methodology across a reasonable number of projects, you'll influence the change. Love it. All right, Chris Rouse, are you able to 3D print with reused materials? What about the reuse potential of the houses you're building?
Chris, I love this question because the construction industry is one of the most responsible industries in terms of sustainability. We are in charge of 40% of CO2 emissions globally. So the fact that we are not designing to reuse is detrimental. So with 3D printing, what's so interesting is that now we could get very creative with the kinds of materials we're using in terms of local materials, but also reused materials. So one of the companies that we were talking to is called ArcLight, ARQLITE, amazing founder. And what they're using is reused plastics to create concrete. So that's examples of material science that we're very interested in investing into. One for 3D printing, because again, you could do, when you're looking at aggregate that you're mixing with cement for a 3D printer, you could start looking at aggregate that is reused. So in ArcLight's example, it's with plastics, but that's across any kind of industrialized construction mechanism or just traditional construction. We should be reusing materials. And actually, my thesis in my master's degree was design for reuse. And I studied at EPFL in Switzerland. And it's amazing how we've been doing this for centuries. I mean, the Japanese do this all the time with interlocking wood joints. So there's a lot that we could learn from history, but also with new technologies that we could start finding synergies together.
Love it. Chris, thank you so much for the question. Dennis Staggerwalt's in the house. Let's see what Dennis has to say. President of the Housing Innovation Alliance and teammate of Betsy Scott. Great insights on the global issues and inspiring goal to cut costs in half. Fortune favors the bold. What's the status of fundraising efforts, and is there an opportunity for new LPs to participate? I know you touched on it a little bit earlier, but why don't we do a refresh?
Of course. Well, the number one question here is there an opportunity for LPs to invest in Home Team? And the answer is yes. We are full on fundraising right now. So Home Team Ventures started in August of 2020. So that was in the middle of the pandemic. And since then, we are raising a $15 million fund. We've raised about $7 million. We have incredible LPs like Autodesk, Pete Flint, Jason Green, so amazing people in the VC community as well as Impact. We have an executive at the World Bank. She is incredible and a specialist in housing, helping us truly think through how we're going to be measuring impact. And we have a lot of home builders and developers in the AEC space. So we want to bring in LPs who, one, understand the sector, they understand the pain points, they're willing to bring in innovation, but two, are going to also be helping us in the diligence process. So when we are at the late stages of should we invest, should we not invest, they're going to provide incredible feedback and opinions. We are truly looking at having our LPs be part of our team with us in terms of bringing these technologists and entrepreneurs into the construction space and really changing it, making it more digitized. We truly need this in the housing space. So we are definitely looking for LPs, and you can check us out at hometeam.vc.
Dennis, as in Boston, they say wicked smart. Good question. Thank you, Dennis. Love it. All right, moving on. AJ has a question from YouTube. If you break up the median home price, at least in the US, a significant component is not related to materials and labor. How can we address those pieces of the puzzle?
AJ, amazing question. I actually have a link that I could share later with Dave to share out, which looks at breaking up cost for housing and how we cannot even break even for developers to build affordable housing. So some of the biggest chunks of cost in the US, which is it's different between every single country, is actually the price of land. And then at the very end, the financing of the home. But in the US specifically, cost of land, depending on which state you're in, is sometimes the highest cost in home building. So even if we have the most innovative construction methods, even if we have, for example, one of the startups that I love is called Jupe, and they're building housing for $17.5 thousand per unit off grid. But if I plop that on a piece of land that's too expensive, I still can't afford it altogether. So we have to also find founders that are doing creative things in the prop tech space, fintech space. So who is doing something that in terms of land titles and also acquiring land, the permitting process, these big chunks at the beginning of a project that even if you have the best industrialized construction mechanism or for labor shortage, something that's further along the construction value chain, those beginning portions are sometimes the highest cost, and we need to find innovators that are looking at that space too.
Love it. Thank you very much, AJ, for the question. YouTube in the house. Love it. All right, Judy Donnell. Julietta, do you know Judy Donnell? Have you ever heard the name?
I don't believe I do know Judy.
Judy is the chair of all the associate members at the National Association of Home Builders, all 88,000 of them. And Judy would like to be in touch with you to talk about some contacts she may have to share. So Judy is at the top of the game when it comes to being in contact with everybody. And you know what's great about Judy? She is with 84 Lumber as well. And I don't know if you know this, 84 Lumber is a female-owned lumber company. That's
amazing.
Isn't that awesome? So
I love that. Judy, I will connect with you, and I'm so impressed that you are a female leader in the space. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. And a force to be reckoned with as well. I don't mess with her. No, she's awesome. So much fun. All right, Colby Swanson. Hey, Colby, Juliet, I definitely appreciate the global challenge Home Team is tackling. But can you speak specific examples how your team views the existing NA modular industry and its many factory assets, hundreds of existing factories? Most factories have not yet modernized, which is needed to drive down costs. Thoughts? Perhaps a fund targeted modernizing existing factories. Now, Julia, I'm going to leave this up so you don't have to remember all those questions. But with Colby is heading up the MMC, the Modular Mobilization Coalition, where they brought together, 20 plus, maybe more at this point, factories across the country to try and start standardizing what they are doing so they can all put things through their production lines with everybody being so busy and work together as a collective unit. So there you have a little background on Colby. And then he has one other comment. I'll go back to that one so we have it. I view the existing offsite industry as a huge untapped asset. All right, go ahead.
Colby, amazing question. Completely agree. We already have, like I said before, we have a lot of the resources already. It's about bringing these founders into the construction space in a more efficient way. So one thing I'll say is we're actually looking at technologies that are going to make factories more efficient. So there's a founder that we love, and we've been looking at the company for a while, called Offsite. And what they're looking at is like a PM tool. So think of a PM toolkit that we use in regular construction, but for offsite construction. So there's a ton of tools that we use at major companies for scheduling and project management of on-site construction. Very few for offsite and dedicated to offsite. And there's a lot to learn from other industries. I mean, the aerospace industry, the automotive industry, they already have these tools. But we need to use them and adapt them for housing specifically or for construction specifically. So what we're looking at is not necessarily the tool that's going to make, for example, in this case, bringing in another factory. It's who is making the factories that already exist smarter or connecting these factories. So one example is Offsite, and they're looking at creating a PM toolkit for offsite construction. Another one is companies that are looking at not creating another factory themselves and building another factory, which is very capital intensive, but how can you make the process of permitting the designs that are going on in factories faster, or the process of connecting different factories together? So mom and pop shop developers could start tapping into those factories to have lower cost units or lower cost section of units. For example, you get to a factory that builds only roofing and another factory that builds the superstructure of a house, and you connect those two together. So it's about getting creative in terms of using the resources that already exist, but making them smarter, faster, and cheaper.
Perfect. Awesome question, Colby. Thank you so much. You're talking about offsite, OFSIGHT, right?
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Okay. Yep, definitely seen them out and about. All right, let's go back down a little further here. Joel Hutchins, are you seeing any innovations on data flow and supply chain efficiencies to help all SMEs contribute collectively to the affordable housing space?
100% on supply chain and deal flow. We're seeing a ton of that, especially for exchange of materials. So again, there's a ton of innovation out there. There's not a lack of innovators in our space in any single bucket of the construction value chain. What's lacking is VCs that are going in specifically to grab these technologies in construction and say, use them in housing. And we're one of the few VCs that are doing exactly that. We're hyper-focused on housing, and we're hyper-focused on helping the founders. As home builders ourselves, our backgrounds are in Alexandria, her background's in international development, working with governments to build housing communities. She founded New Story. She's been there from the very beginning, understand what it means to build a community of housing. My background's in structural engineering and architecture. I understand the design side and the lack of innovation there. So we're coming at it with these founders and saying, we will help you adapt the technology for housing specifically. If you believe in the mission, you believe in the issue of the lack of housing, we want to be using your tools for this space specifically. So yeah, definitely seeing a lot of innovations in supply chain. What really is lacking is someone that's bringing in the adoption piece, someone that's helping these founders work in the space, and then finding developers that want to be adopting these technologies for housing.
Awesome, Joel. Great question. All right, Julietta, listen, we are over an hour. What do we got left to go through? The floor is yours. I'm on your time schedule. We can stay here until 5 p.m. if you like.
I know you got an RV to drive and you have to go Antelope Canyon like I suggested. I think we covered a lot of ground here. So if you want any more information about Home Team, I urge you to go visit our website, hometeam.vc. We're also on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn. And again, we are looking for LPs to invest in our fund. So LPs that truly believe in the lack of innovation in construction and how we need that for the housing crisis. And we're also looking for early stage founders in our space who want to be using their technologies for social impact. So if you'd like to contact me, my email is Julieta, Julieta at hometeam.vc. And you could also contact me through our website. I really appreciate everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, we do as well. Julia, there's a couple more comments that are popping up. If you could just go in after the show and answer them, unless you would like to do it now. I'm also going to bring Betsy back in just to thank Betsy for introducing us and bringing us together. She's all smiles. I see her already. What's happening, Betsy? You're muted.
I know. I have to get back into the swing of your live streams, but I'm very excited. And for those of you, absolutely reach out to Julieta. We're also really interested in looking at the companies that she's helping to fund and seeing how they can help in the production housing space in the U.S. We've got a lot of topic areas that we're looking at. Certainly digitization is one of them. So we'll be looking at how we can connect some of the people that you've been contributing to and partnering with the builders and developers and architects and engineers that we work with and manufacturers who are part of the Alliance community. So excited to do that. And then if you want to learn more about Julieta and Alexandria, which I'm fascinated to, we are going to invite them to do her stories in housing with us. And Julieta is going to be part of our future in housing group. So we'll be picking her brain throughout the year to see, what does she see as the big opportunities as she's doing her research and she's going out and finding new people to invest in and bringing that information back to the Alliance as well. So very exciting, great stuff today, and looking forward to continuing connecting.
Yeah, very much so. Julieta, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much to Betsy and you and Dennis and the whole team at Housing Innovation Alliance for setting this up. I have a feeling Julieta and I are going to be talking more often in the future with everything going on in this world. So welcome to the family, as I say. I love it.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Love it. Love it. All right. So there you have it, everybody. Another Monday expert interview completed. Hopefully we delivered as we always do. I definitely feel we exceeded. I've seen comments like I've never seen before from some of the fellas out there saying that, Julieta, you outdid everybody so far that is in the comments today. There's a couple of them that have been on the show. So those are big words coming from some pretty smart people. So I love it. So with that said, if you guys want any more information, this will live on YouTube. It'll take about 12 to 24 hours for YouTube to post it. But if you want to rewatch everything we talked about today, please go to our YouTube channel and subscribe. And as always, please follow Julieta and Betsy on LinkedIn and their other social media platforms. They're doing amazing things. And if you have innovative ideas, let's share them with each other and get it out there. So that's it, everybody. I'm Dave Cooper. Thank you very much for watching. We will see you tomorrow at 1 p.m. for Building Modular with your host, Jennifer Cooper. We'll talk soon. You two don't go anywhere. We'll come right back. Bye now.